Hello and welcome to Dawn Chorus Writes, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction and Audiofics. This is a new mini-series called Strawberry Kisses. It was meant to be a one-shot and then it turned into a mini-series because I didn't stop writing it. And these are actually really long parts. So I hope you love it. Massive shout out to the artist Solodrafts for the commissioned artwork I got done. I love this picture and thinking for ages what to write, and then this story came to mind. So I hope you smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure you share to anyone who else might enjoy it. And I hope you enjoy. Part 1. The first taste. Marichat should have been asleep. That was the sensible thing, the logical thing, the thing both her body and Tiki had been quietly encouraging for the past hour, as the lights of Paris softened beyond her bedroom window, and the warm summer air drifted lazily through the slight crack of the skylight above her bed. Instead, she stood in the middle of her room with a plate of strawberry pastries in her hands, holding them with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for something far more important than baked goods. The scent of strawberries and vanilla cream curled through the air, rich and warm, grounding her even as her thoughts drifted elsewhere, upward, towards the open square of night waiting just above her.
Marichat,
Tiki said, her tiny voice threaded with patience that was beginning to wear thin.
I still think I should be allowed to judge them properly before you take them up there.
Marichat shifted the plate slightly so she could nudge the trapdoor closed with her foot, biting back the smile tugging at her lips. Tiki, you are not judging them. You are eating them.
That is not true.
Marichat glanced sideways. Tiki hesitated for a fraction of a second, then lifted her chin with quiet dignity.
It's only partly true.
That made Marichat laugh, soft and unguarded, the sound filling the quiet of her room. It eased something in her chest, something tight she hadn't fully noticed until it loosened. She adjusted her grip on the plate and looked up. The skylight framed the night like an invitation. Deep blue stretched endless beyond it, the rooftops of Paris glowing softly below like scattered constellations. Freedom. Space. Something just out of reach but close enough to touch. We'll go up, she said, already moving towards the ladder. Then you can help me decide which one is best. Tiki brightened instantly.
Really?
Yes, really.
And I get equal tasting rights?
Marichat raised an eyebrow as she climbed. Equal?
I have a refined palate.
You have a sweet tooth.
I can have both.
Marichat smiled despite herself. That is unfortunately true. By the time she pushed herself up through the skylight, the air had already changed. Cooler, softer, carrying with it distant hum of Paris settling into night. She stepped onto the rooftop and everything opened. The city stretched around her in layers of shadow and golden light, rooftops rolling into the distance like waves. Her fairy lights cast a gentle glow across a small terrace, illuminating the familiar clutter of her space. The chair slightly out of place, the table tucked near the edge, and the quiet comfort of something entirely her own. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And tonight, with strawberries in her hands and summer wrapped softly around her shoulders, it felt like something more.
Oh,
Tiki breathed, drifting closer to the plate.
They smell amazing.
Marichat set them down carefully, a flicker of pride warming her chest. That's because they are amazing. She reached for the prettiest one. Princess, are you planning to eat those without me? Marichat gasped, the pastry slipping slightly in her fingers as she spun towards the voice. Cat Noir sat perched on the railing like he'd always belonged there, one knee raised, the city lights catching in his eyes, his grin already far too pleased with himself. "Cat! You sound surprised." "You appeared out of nowhere." He shrugged slightly, dropping down with effortless ease. "Dramatic entrances are part of my charm." Her heart was still racing, though whether from the surprise or something else entirely, she didn't let herself examine too closely. "You gave me a heart attack." "Yes," he said, stepping closer, "but your heart is still beating, so I think we can call it a success." She tried not to smile. She failed. "Who said these are for you?" Cat placed a hand over his chest, mock wounded. "Princess, I'm hurt." Behind her, Tiki muttered under her breath. "He's only been here 6 seconds. Marichat pressed her lips together, shoulders shaking slightly as she fought the laugh threatening to escape. Cat's gaze flickered briefly to the plate before returning to her, softening just slightly. "Marichat," he said quieter now. Her heart gave an unexpected traitorous flutter. "Yes?" "You made these." It wasn't a question. "Yes?" "For me?" "For the festival." "But conveniently available to be stolen by a handsome cat." She barely had time to react before he swooped in and took one. "Cat!" He bit into it immediately, closing his eyes as though committing fully to the experience. "That's very good." Marichat stared at him, and then she laughed. She couldn't help it. The sound slipped out, warm and bright, carried softly into the night, and something in his expression shifted at once. "There it is," he murmured. "What?" "That laugh." Her breath caught slightly as the way he said it, like it mattered. "You are impossible." "And yet," he said quietly, "you let me come back." She didn't answer that, because she couldn't. Cat's gaze flickered briefly to the plate before returning to her, softened just slightly. "Marichat," he said, quieter now. Her heart gave another traitorous flutter. It always did that. And that was the problem. Because this wasn't new. Not really. Not entirely. She knew him. She knew the way his voice softened when he dropped the teasing. The way his attention settled fully when he chose to give it. The way he looked at people like they mattered. She had seen it before. On rooftops. In the middle of battle. In the quiet moments between chaos. When Ladybug stood beside him and pretended not to notice how steady he was. How constant. But this felt different. Here, it felt real. No expectations, no role play, just Marichat, just Cat, and somehow that made it worse. And yet, this wasn't just Cat. This was the boy who trusted her in battle without question. The partner who stood at her side when everything went wrong. The one who would look at her. Really look at her. If he ever knew, if he ever realized, what would he think? And suddenly the space between who she was here and who she was with him as Ladybug felt dangerously thin. "Yes?" Her voice faltered slightly as he responded with a chef's kiss. "Oh, you are impossible," she said, quieter now, ignoring the feeling inside her chest. "And yet," he said just as softly, "like I said, you let me come back." And that was the part she didn't have an answer for. Why she let him stay. Why she didn't send him away. Why, when he showed up like this, unannounced, unguarded, she didn't immediately put the distance back between them where it belonged. Because it would be easier, safer, cleaner, but instead, she let him stand there. Let him smile at her like this. Let him be Kat, not her partner. Not the person she had kept secrets from. Just him. And she didn't know what that said about her. She didn't answer him because she couldn't. Instead, she watched him, really watched him, as he took another bite, far less dramatic this time, like he was actually tasting it properly now rather than performing for her benefit. And then, without thinking, he licked a bit of cream from his lips and missed. The moment should have passed. It should have been nothing, just another small, forgettable detail in a night that would blur into the rest. But it didn't, because she noticed. Because she always noticed. "You missed some," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Hmm?" he murmured, glancing at her without concern, completely unaware. And that was what made it dangerous. He wasn't thinking about it. He wasn't measuring the distance between them or weighing what it meant to stand this close. He wasn't calculating the shift in the air, the way something quiet and fragile had begun to settle between them. That was her job. And it hadn't always been her job. And for a second, she forgot to do it. She stepped closer. It wasn't a large movement, barely anything at all, but it closed the space between them in a way that made everything else seem to fall away. A hand lifted before she fully registered the decision, a thumb brushing lightly across his lip. Warm, soft, real, and everything stilled. Nothing around them changed, not really. Paris still hummed in the distance. The light still glowed. The night carried on exactly as it always did. But the moment shifted. Subtle and undeniable. Like something had tilted just enough to be felt rather than seen. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His gaze settled on her, sharper now, more focused, like she had drawn him fully into the moment without meaning to. Her breath caught. She should step back. She knew she should. This was where it stopped. This was where Marichat existed and Ladybug stepped in, where distance returned and everything felt neatly back into place. But Ladybug wasn't here, and Marichat hesitated. Because here, in the quiet of a rooftop with no mask, no expectation, he didn't feel like a partner. He didn't feel like the boy she had to keep secrets from. He felt different, easier, closer, like something she didn't have to guard herself against. And that was worse, because it made her want to stay. Her hand lingered a fraction longer than it should have before she pulled it back slowly. "There," she said, softer now, though the words didn't fix anything. If anything, it made it clearer. Because he was still looking at her, not teasing, not playful, just present in the way that made the space between them feel smaller than it should have been. His gaze flickered briefly to her mouth before lifting again, and her heart stumbled, faster now, louder, impossible to ignore. She became aware of everything at once. The warmth of the night air, the distant murmur of the city, the way her pulse had climbed too high too quickly, the way he hadn't stepped back, the way she didn't either. This was how mistakes happened. Not all at once, not in a single reckless decision, but in moments like this. Quiet, soft, almost harmless, until they weren't. Her fingers curled slightly at her side, like she was holding onto something invisible. She should move. She should say something, laugh, break the moment before it settled any deeper, turn it into something safe, something familiar. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was, he didn't want to. And that thought settled in her chest with a weight that felt far heavier than it should have. Because wanting this, wanting him here like this, meant accepting what it would become, what it could cost. "Hold still," she murmured at last, her voice softer than she intended, the words more excuse than instruction. He didn't move. He didn't question it. He simply stayed there, watching her, like he was waiting for permission, but for her to decide. And that was the worst part, because it meant this wasn't an accident anymore. This wasn't something happening to her. This was a choice, her choice. Her thoughts flickered, uneven and tangled, warnings she had learnt to listen to rising instinctively. This was a mistake. You know this is a mistake. If he ever... She stopped the thought before she could finish it. Because she didn't want to follow it. Didn't want to see where it led. Instead, something quieter slipped through. Softer, but far more dangerous. She wanted to. And that was the thought that stayed, the one that settled deep enough to matter, the one that tipped her forward just slightly, just enough she wanted to. And once that truth settled, quiet and undeniable, everything else seemed to follow behind it. Not quickly, not recklessly. If anything, the moment slowed around her, stretching thin with awareness. She could hear the faint details of the world around her, the distant rush of a scooter somewhere far off, the soft flutter of the fairy lights as the warm night breeze touched them. But all of it felt very far away now, blurred at the edges by simply the fact that Kat was still standing there, still watching her, still close enough that if she leaned forward... No, she should not finish that thought. She knew that. She knew exactly how dangerous this was, not because of the possibility itself, not because of some silly, stolen rooftop moment that could be laughed off later, if she absolutely had to, but because nothing between her and Kat had ever really been simple. Not when he was her partner, not when he was the person who stood beside her in battle and trusted her with everything he had without ever asking her for more than she could safely give. Not when he knew her in one life so deeply that sometimes she wondered if the mask did anything at all. And yet, here, he knew her differently. That was what unsettled her most. Because as Ladybug, she always held herself in careful lines, controlled, measured, stronger than she felt. She had kept him at just enough distance to keep them both safe. Even when it hurt, even when he made her laugh, even when he looked at her with that open, impossible devotion that she had never quite known what to do with. But Marinette laughed too easily around him. Let him see her when she was messy, flustered, honest. Let him sit on her balcony and steal pastries and tease smiles out of her when the day had left her tired to the bone. Marinette let him feel close in a way Ladybug never could. And if he ever started to notice how those two versions fit together, if he ever looked too closely, if he ever realized, the thought lodged sharp and unfinished inside of her. She could not think that far ahead, not now. Not with his gaze fixed on her like this, steady and searching, as though he already knew this moment mattered and was waiting to see what she would do with it. Her fingers tightened very slightly at the fabric of his collar. Not enough to pull, just enough to hold on. Kat's eyes flickered down to the movement, then back to her face. His breath had changed, only a little. Only enough that someone who didn't know him wouldn't have noticed. She noticed. Of course she noticed. For all the nonsense he wrapped around himself. Every grin, every joke, every careless little line designed to make things easier. There were always these moments underneath it, small, quiet ones, when he stopped performing and simply was. She had seen them in battle before, in the breath between one plan and the next, in the second after impact, when the pain flashed across his face before he smoothed it away, in the way he said her name when it mattered. And now, she was seeing it here. Not Cat Noir, impossible flirt and rooftop menace. Not her partner beneath Paris lights, just Cat. Just the boy behind the mask, letting her see him and not looking away. It made her heart ache in a way she didn't have words for. "Princess," he said softly. There was no joke in it this time. Just a nickname on his mouth, like something careful, something almost fragile. She swallowed. He was waiting. Not moving closer, not forcing anything, just waiting. Oh, that made it worse. Because if he teased her, she could have hidden behind irritation. If he had smirked, she could have rolled her eyes. If he had turned the whole thing into one more game between them, she could have escaped into that familiar rhythm and pretended none of this was real. But he didn't. He just stood there, warm and steady and entirely too patient, and let the choice belong to her. Marichat drew in a breath that did nothing to steady her. Then, before she could think too hard, before she could build the distance back up and convince herself this only had ever been a harmless moment, she imagined too deeply. She leaned forward. Just a little. Just enough. Her lips brushed his, softly. It was barely even a kiss at first, more the shape of one than certainty of it. A breath of warmth, a fleeting sweetness, the lightness possible press, like the first taste of strawberry cream caught on the edge of her tongue. There and gone so quickly that for half a heartbeat she wondered if she imagined it. But no, because he was real. The warmth of him was real, and the stillness that followed was real. Cat didn't move. And somehow that made the moment expand rather than break. The world thinned around them until all she could feel was a rapid hammer of her own pulse and the shock of what she had done rushing belatedly through her. She had kissed him. She had actually kissed him. The thought landed a fraction too late. Marichat pulled back immediately, her breath catching hard in her throat as though her body had just remembered how close they were. What the line she had crossed, how impossible it would be to uncross it now. Oh! The sound barely made it out. Cat was staring at her. Not theatrically. Not with one of his bright, exaggerated looks of wounded flirting or smug triumph. He looked stunned. Truly, openly stunned. His eyes were wider than she had ever seen them, bright in the low golden light, his mouth parted slightly as though he had been about to say something and forgotten how. For the first time since she had ever met him, Cat Noir was absolutely no line ready. No pun, no flirt, no clever save, nothing. And somehow that made it feel even more real than anything else could have. Marichat suddenly became aware of everything all at once. The warm brushing of her skin, the quiet city below, the fact that her lips were still half curled at the sides as though her body didn't know what to do next, the taste of strawberry still lingering faintly on her lips. "Kitty," she said at last, the words small and cautious in the space between them. He blinked once, twice, and then, very slowly, he raised one gloved hand and touched his own mouth, as though confirming to himself that it actually happened. When he looked back at her, the softness in his face had changed into something deeper. something so open and startled that it sent another panic flutter through her chest. "Princess," he said, and his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Marichat's heart tripped over itself again. "Yes?" A pause followed, long enough for her to start wishing the rooftop might kindly split open beneath her and save her from having to exist inside this moment for another second. Then Kat let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though there was something unsteady beneath it. I think... He stopped, glanced at her mouth once more, and when he spoke again his smile had returned, but it was softer now, touched at the edges with disbelief. "That might be my new favourite strawberry recipe." The words should have broken the tension. They almost did. Almost. Marichat made a helpless little sound, somewhere between a gasp and a groan, and immediately turned away, pressing the back of one of her hands to her forehead as though that might somehow fix the fact that she just kissed Cat Noir on a balcony, like her mind had simply taken leave of her body. "Oh my goodness." Behind her, she heard him let out the smallest laugh, still soft, still dazed. "That's fair." "Oh, that is not fair," she muttered, mortified. "That is the opposite of fair." "It was a very good line." "It was a terrible line." "It was a memorable line." She turned just enough to glare at him, though she knew very well the expression was ruined by the heat still flooding her cheeks. "You are taking this suspiciously well for someone who just got kissed without warning." Kat's brows lifted slightly. "Suspiciously well?" "Yes." He lowered his hand from his mouth at last, though his eyes hadn't quite lost that astonished brightness yet. "Princess, I'm doing my absolute best." That made her blink, because beneath the attempt at humour, there it was again, that honesty, clear and quiet and impossible to ignore. He really was trying to steady himself. He really had not expected that. And somehow the knowledge that she had surprised him as much as herself made her chest tighten in a way that was somehow both better and worse. "Oh," she said, because it's all she had. Cat tilted his head just slightly, watching her with a look that had gone softer now, more thoughtful. "That," he said after a moment, "was either the most impulsive decision you've ever made?" Marichat closed her eyes briefly. "Please don't finish that sentence." "Or the most flattering one." She let out a strangled sound. "Oh, Cat!" He held up one hand in surrender. "Too soon?" "Very." "Noted." That should have made it easier. It should have pulled them back towards something familiar, something manageable, but the truth of the moment still sat there between them, quiet and glowing, impossible to joke away completely, because she had kissed him, and he had liked it. And now neither of them quite knew what to do with that. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt different now. Not heavier exactly, but changed. Like something invisible had settled into the space and refused to be ignored. The easy rhythm they had slipped into earlier, all teasing and lightness, had softened into something quieter, something that carried weight in ways Marichat wasn't entirely sure how to navigate. She became acutely aware of how close they still were, of how little space actually separated them, of the fact that if neither of them shifted away slightly, they could close that distance again without meaning to. Her heart was still racing. It hadn't slowed. If anything, it seemed to have decided that this was an excellent time to make its presence known in the most unhelpful way possible. She cleared her throat, the sound a little too loud in the quiet. You still have pastry? Cat blinked, like the statement took a second to reach. Then he glanced down at the half-finished treat still in his hand, as though he had entirely forgotten it existed. Right, he said, a faint puff of breath escaping him. Important priorities. Marichat nodded quickly. Yes, exactly. Very important. There was a beat. Then, almost at the same time, they both shifted, just slightly, just enough to create a fraction more space between them. It helped. A little. Not enough. Cat took another bite, more out of habit than intention, and for once he didn't comment on the taste. Didn't exaggerate or tease or make some dramatic declaration about her baking skills. He just ate it, quietly. And that, for more than anything, made Marichat's chest tighten, because Cat Noel was never quite like this. Not unless something mattered. She busied herself with the plate, adjusting pastries that didn't need adjusting, smoothing edges that were already perfect. Anything to give her hand something to do that wasn't acknowledging the way the moment still lingered between them. You didn't run away, Cat said after a moment. The words were soft, almost thoughtful. Marichat paused. That's usually what happens, he added lightly, though the edge of humour didn't quite reach his eyes this time. I say something, you get flustered, and then... He made a small gesture with his free hand like something scattering. Gone. She huffed a small breath. I don't always run away. Not always, he agreed, but often enough that I've come to expect it. Marichat hesitated, her fingers stilling against the edge of the plate. He wasn't wrong. There had always been that line between them, even here. A point where things became too real, too close, too much, and she would retreat before it could tip any further. But she hadn't this time. She hadn't stepped back, hadn't deflected, hadn't hidden behind nerves or excuses. She had stayed, and worse, she had crossed the line herself. I didn't run, she said slowly, as though testing the truth of it as she spoke. Cat's gaze flickered to her again, something softer settling there. No, he said. You didn't. The quiet that followed felt different now. Not empty. Full. Marichat exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction. You're not supposed to say things like that, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Like what? She glanced at him, then away again just as quickly. Things that make it harder to pretend this is normal? Cat was quiet for a beat, then very gently. Do you want it to be normal? The question landed deeper than she expected, because she didn't have an easy answer. Normal would be safe. Normal would be simple. Normal would mean this, whatever this was, didn't exist. But that wasn't what this felt like, and pretending it was wouldn't make it true. I don't know, she admitted, her voice quieter now. He stood at her for a moment, and then nodded slightly, like he understood more than she had said. That's fair, he said. I don't think I do either. Marichat let out a small breath, something in her chest easing just a little at that. Because at least she wasn't the only one. At least this wasn't something she had imagined on her own. Cat shifted his weight, glancing briefly out of the city before looking back at her again. For what it's worth, he added, a hint of his usual warmth returning. I'm not complaining. Marichat's lips twitched despite herself. Of course you're not. Hey, he said, mock offended now, though the softness hadn't quite left his expression. I'm allowed to appreciate quality experiences. You got kissed once, and I appreciate it. She shook her head, but the tension in her shoulders eased another fraction. You're impossible. And yet, he said quieter now, the words settling into something more sincere. You're still here. Her breath caught again, because he kept doing that, taking something light and letting it land just a little deeper than expected. She looked at him properly then, really looked, and for a moment the rest of the world faded out again. Not as sharply as before, not as all-consuming, but enough that the edges of everything else softened. This was Kat, her partner, her friend, the boy who stood beside her when everything went wrong, the one who trusted her without question. And now he was also the one she had kissed. The lines between those things blurred in a way that made her chest ache, because she didn't know how to separate them anymore, and she didn't know if she wanted to. That doesn't mean anything, she said quietly, though the words felt weaker than she intended. Kat tilted his head slightly. Doesn't it? She hesitated, because it did. Of course it did. Everything about this meant something. That was the problem. I mean, she tried again, faltering slightly. It doesn't mean we... She stopped, because she didn't know how to finish that sentence. Doesn't mean we what? That this was nothing? That this wouldn't happen again? That she hadn't wanted it? None of those felt true. Kat watched her for a moment, then let out a soft breath, like he had decided not to push it. It doesn't have to mean anything tonight, he said instead, the gentleness in his voice catching her off guard. Marichat blinked. That's not how things usually work, she said. I know, he replied, but maybe it can be. He glanced out over the city again, then back at her, a small, careful smile forming. We don't have to figure it out right now. The words settled into her slowly. No pressure, no expectation, no immediate consequences, just the moment. And for the first time since it had happened, Marichat felt something in her chest loosen properly. Because maybe it didn't have to be a decision yet. Maybe it could just be this. Okay, she said softly. Kat smiled warm just a little. Okay. They stood there for a while after that, the tension easing into something quieter, something more manageable. Not gone, not resolved, but softened around the edges enough that it didn't feel like it might tip over at any second. Eventually, Kat straightened slightly, glanced back towards the rooftops beyond her balcony. I should probably go, he said, though there was a faint reluctance in his words. Marichat nodded, even as something small and unexpected tugged in her chest at that thought. You probably should. He hesitated for half a second and looked back at her. Same time tomorrow? The question was light, casual, like it didn't matter, like it hadn't just changed everything. Marichat's heart skipped. She should say no. She knew she should. This was exactly how things spiraled, one moment turning into another, into something harder to step away from with every passing day. But instead... Maybe? She said. Kat's grin returned, softer than before but no less certain. I'll take that maybe. And then, before she could second-guess it, he stepped back, light and effortless again as he moved towards the railing. He paused just long enough to glance at her one more time. Something unspoken flickered in his expression before he turned and disappeared into Paris night. Marichat stood there long after he was gone, The rooftop felt quieter now, still warm, still familiar, but not the same. She let out a slow breath, her fingers brushing absently against her lips, as though the memory of the moment might still be there. It was. Of course it was.
Oh,
Tiki said softly from behind her, as though she had been holding her breath the entire time.
that was a lot.
Marichat huffed a weak laugh, running a hand over her face. Oh, that's one way of putting it. Tiki drifted closer, studying her carefully.
You kissed him.
Yes, Marichat said faintly. I'm aware.
You really kissed him?
Yes, Tiki. Akwami tilted her head slightly, concern thread through her expression now.
Marichat, you know what that could mean.
Marichat closed her eyes briefly. Yes, she did. That was the problem. I know, she said quietly, because this wasn't just Kat. It never had been. This was her partner, the person she trusted most. The one person who could unravel everything if the truth slipped, even a little. And now she had blurred the lines herself. I know, she repeated, softer this time. Tiki hovered for a moment longer, then settled gently against her shoulders.
You don't have to figure it out tonight.
Marichat let out a small breath, something in her chest easing just slightly at the echo of Kat's words. That's what he said. Tiki hummed thoughtfully.
Maybe he's right.
Maybe, Marichat murmured. But as she turned back towards the skylight, climbing down into the quiet of her room, the weight of the moment followed her. Because maybe it didn't have to mean anything tonight. But that didn't mean it wouldn't mean something tomorrow. And as she lay back against her bed, staring up at the open square of night above her, one thought lingered quietly at the edge of everything else. She had kissed Cat Noir, and she didn't regret it. That was what scared her the most. Thank you for listening to part 1 of Strawberry Kisses. I hope you've enjoyed it. Look out for part 2. It's coming very, very soon. Make sure you smash that like button. Comment down below what you think. And make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. And I will speak to you soon. Bye.